Cricket's day of shame. Whistleblower Asim Rafiq tells MPs the sport is worse than society for racism. At times he was close to tears, describing his treatment as inhuman, humiliating and isolating. He gave countless examples of racist behaviour towards players from Asian backgrounds. This is just one.
There was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets," elephant washers. No one ever stamped it out.
Also ahead, the couple who once gave the Liverpool taxi bomber a home on their relief no one else was killed. By day, by inflatable boat, dozens more migrants attempt the dangerous journey across the Channel. And Charles and Camilla in Jordan, their first major overseas visit since the pandemic began.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Asim Rafiq has given a detailed, shocking and at times harrowing account of the bombardment of racism he experienced at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. From being pinned down and forced to drink alcohol as a teenage Muslim to describing how the non-white players on the team were all called the generic name Kevin. There was, he said, the constant use of racist language, much of which we have chosen not to broadcast this lunchtime, which became the norm. He said there were bystanders and no one stamped it out, that the issues he faced at Yorkshire are widespread in English cricket, and he wouldn't want his son going near the sport. Our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan, was listening.
Nothing Asim Rafiq achieved on the field of play can match the impact he is now having on English cricket. His evidence to MPs today, a devastating account of racism and abuse from the moment he arrived at Yorkshire Cricket Club.
There was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets," elephant washers. The word was used constantly, and there just seems to be an acceptance in the institution from the leaders, and no one ever stamped it out.
But he said the problem went beyond Yorkshire, and even as a teenager he was subjected to a shocking assault by another player.
I actually got pinned down at my local cricket club, and red wine got poured down my throat.
How old were you?
15.
15, you're a Muslim, 15.
15-year-old. I got literally down my throat. The player played for Yorkshire, played for Hampshire.
He described how he came to confront the problem when he was offered little support after the stillbirth of his first child.
I've just carried my son from the hospital to the graveyard, and how I'm getting treated here is not right. And to me, it became very clear that even myself, that I'd been looking the other way. And there's a real problem here, not just Yorkshire, throughout the country. And I'm going to be the one that's going to speak about this.
Rafiq made his story public in September 2020, prompting a club investigation. A year later, Yorkshire confirmed there had been racial harassment, but denied institutional racism. Last month, they said there'd been no conduct that warranted disciplinary action.
When I saw that post come up, I was staggered. I was like, at what point do these people, are they going to read the room? So I think even as close as 2 weeks ago, they genuinely felt they could hide this.
The man who resigned as Yorkshire's chairman 10 days ago said he believed the club was institutionally racist.
In the last few months, there's been a substantial amount of thoughtlessness and ignorance, a reluctance to apologise, a reluctance to see Asim as the victim.
The current chairman has apologised and says he wants Yorkshire to have the right culture and values. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Our sports editor, Steve Scott, is with me. You've been watching those hearings. I have to say, for very many people, they will have been very difficult to listen to.
Definitely, Nina. I think you used the word earlier, harrowing. I found some of it. To listen to what someone went through on a near daily basis, you know, this catalogue of abuse that Azim Rafiq has outlined this morning. I mean, he was very dignified. He was explaining that, look, he's not here for revenge. He did name names, some very big names, but that wasn't the purpose of the hearing this morning. He wanted his experience to be a watershed moment, and I think it will be, or at least very much it should be. But I think for that to be the case today was absolutely needed. People needed to hear about these casual racial slurs that were hurled at him and other Asian players, all part of this dressing room culture that existed and still does exist today. I think it was a measure of what Yorkshire thought about his complaints, that they gave one of Azim Rafiq's teammates, Gary Ballance, who's already come out and admitted that he used racial slurs in describing Rafiq, the captaincy of the club and an extended contract. And that's what I think we're dealing with here. The director of cricket, after that terrible story of how poor Azim Rafiq and his wife lost their son, to use Rafiq's words, the next day, the very next day after that happened, this man tore shreds out of him. Rafiq was suicidal at the time. And all along, he said he went to the ECB, the governing body of cricket, and he went to the PCA, which is effectively the players' union, begging for help. And at every turn, he says, they ignored him. There's a painful, painful road ahead here.
What could it lead to, though, in terms of change?
Well, it's got to. Cricket's got to reset itself. It's got to do so urgently. I mean, several other cricketers, since Azim Rafiq, the story has emerged, have come out publicly, but Rafiq said himself in the hearing this morning that he's been contacted by several others from various other counties who are still too scared to speak up. Now, Rafiq says he wants to be part of the solution in the future. He wants to be a voice for the voiceless. And he said in 5 years' time, if he's made any small change at all, he'll look back on his cricket career and think, what I've done now is far greater than anything I did on the pitch. And that we can only hope that is the case.
We watch and wait. Steve Scott, thank you very much for that. Thank you. A couple who lived with the man who blew up a taxi with a homemade bomb outside a Liverpool hospital have told ITV News they're relieved that no one else was killed in the blast. Elizabeth and Malcolm Hitchcock took Ahmad Al-Swalmeen into their home in 2017. Our North of England reporter Hannah Miller is in Liverpool. We're learning a lot more about him now.
Yes, it's thought Ahmad Al-Swalmeen had recently rented out a property here on Rutland Avenue. It's still sealed off after police say they discovered significant items. It's thought he lived at a different property on Sutcliffe Street, in a different area of the city where police are still getting their searches underway. But 4 people who were arrested in that area of the city have now been released and are not under investigation. It's thought Ahmad Al-Swalmeen was an asylum seeker who had been in the UK for a number of years and had had some mental health difficulties during that time. You can see him here alongside a Christian couple who took him into their home in 2017. They said he had converted to Christianity, and when they knew him, he was very interested in his faith. They, like everybody here, are understandably shocked by what has happened. This is what they had to say.
I mean, he lived here for 8 months. We were living cheek by jowl, and there was never any suggestion of anything amiss.
But the one thing I suppose to be thankful for, that he didn't kill anyone else.
They, of course, had no idea that he would go on to do this. This is a CCTV that shows the moment the taxi he was travelling in exploded outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. He's thought to have caught that taxi from this address here at Rutland Avenue and asked to travel to the Women's Hospital. Police, though, are still trying to understand what his motivation for that was.
Hannah Miller, thank you. ITV News has filmed as dozens of migrants boarded an inflatable boat on a French beach in an attempt to cross the Channel into the UK this morning. Good weather over recent days has led to a record number of people making the crossing. Our correspondent Dan Rivers joins me now from northern France. Dan, what did you see exactly?
Nina, extraordinary scenes this morning as we filmed up to about 50 migrants emerging from the sand dunes, carrying aloft this enormous inflatable dinghy, which they then proceeded to launch into the English Channel, and away they went. This was all done in broad daylight, just after 8 a.m. This morning, one of a number of boats that has launched. We saw two going from the beach we were filming at this morning, but we're in contact with people in Dover who are aware that the Border Force is dealing with potentially up to 50 boats today crossing the channel. Last week, of course, we had this record number in any 24-hour period of almost 1,200. I wouldn't be surprised today if we see perhaps over 1,000 again crossing. And what struck me really was just that there was not a single French policeman in sight, despite the fact that this is a well-known spot for launching dinghies by migrants.
The British government is urging the French one to do more. Is there any sign of that?
Not really. I mean, yesterday we had this, phone call or conversation between Priti Patel and her French counterpart, and we were told that they were going to prevent 100% of crossings. That was the ambition. This morning, Damien Hines, government minister, was again sort of stressing that it was a good conversation, productive, and that they welcome this heightened commitment to stop migrants crossing. The reality seems to be, though, on the ground, that's just not happening. And the migrants know as soon as they're on the water under international maritime law, they're not going to be stopped.
Dan Rivers, thank you. And you can see more of Dan's reporting on our website, itv.com/news. The boss of the NHS in England has warned the health service faces significant pressures this winter. Amanda Pritchard says that the huge backlog in patients waiting for treatment will likely get worse before it gets better. As the NHS struggles to deal with the impact of the pandemic, I'm joined now by the cardiac nurse Carmen Suma Deveria, who works in a London hospital. Carmen, how is it right now for you and for the patients at that hospital?
Hi, Nina. I think, every day we try our best. And so I hope that for the patients that are with us, they're experiencing the best care that they could receive. But for my colleagues and myself, I'll be very honest, loads of days are such a struggle. And every day I feel the pressure of having to perform in a system that doesn't have our back, that basically has failed to recruit the amount of nurses we need to deliver safe patient care. And that weighs on your mind.
How do you cope with that? Because in terms of the pandemic, for the general public, there's been little bits of respite. For the NHS, when cases started to drop, the backlog kicked in. Your work rates never changed. So how do you deal with the fact that this has been ongoing, constant, for the past nearly 2 years?
Some days it does feel just relentless. You cope, obviously, by supporting your colleagues as best you can. But even recently, I've had two nursing colleagues that have graduated with me not too long ago that have had to leave frontline practice and clinical practice because they've been so anxious and so burnt out that they just couldn't see a future for themselves on the wards. And I think that's not an uncommon picture. So the answer is no, we're not coping.
And this is just the start of the winter proper, isn't it? Carmen Suma Deveria, look after yourself, and thank you for joining us this lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, this lunchtime, I'm a Celeb is back as the new campmates are named. What advice for those heading to the castle?
Going into the camp, I wished I knew how actually cold it was going to be. I would have turned my heating off way before I got there.
First, Prince Charles and Camilla are in the Middle East for their first royal tour since the start of the pandemic. A big focus of the trip will be tackling climate change, a cause long championed by the Prince of Wales. Our royal editor, Chris Shipp, is in Jordan, travelling with them. Chris, this is the first major trip in nearly 2 years.
Yeah, royal tours are back on. In fact, Prince Charles and Camilla were meant to be in Jordan in March 2020, just as the pandemic was sweeping through Europe and it was cancelled. They arrived in Amman this morning on board the RAF Voyager. In fact, we reported earlier that RAF Voyager is running on sustainable aviation fuel for the very first time. That's a first for any RAF plane, and helps to maybe perhaps offset some of the criticism about the carbon emitted when the royals go on tour like this. But as you say, they will be in Jordan, then they will be in Egypt, which is the host country of COP27, and therefore that's why climate change, both here in Jordan and in Egypt, will be very high up on the agenda. In fact, we've just been at a centre here where Queen Rania, the Queen Consort here, drove Camilla to the event in a Tesla, in her electric car, and the two women presumably had a nice chat while they were coming out here. But we spoke to Queen Rania while she was at this centre here, which looks after women and girls who have suffered from gender-based violence. But we asked her about our Queen, and she sent through our cameras, she sent our Queen her best wishes on her recent poor health.
She's somebody I look up to personally, and I think the whole world turns to her as a symbol of, you know, just what it means to be a true figurehead and stateswoman, and just giving inspiration to the rest of the world through her discipline, through her hard work, through her steady approach to everything.
So strong royal ties between our royal family and the royal family here, but 2 days in Jordan, as I say, and then we're off to Egypt, where climate change will continue to be a focus, of course, for Prince Charles.
Chris Ship, thank you. Next, Joanna Lumley is in Westminster this lunchtime to call for an end to explosions at sea so new wind farms can be built. The actor is campaigning against the practice of clearing munitions left over from the world wars by blowing them up because of the harm that can do to whales and dolphins. I spoke to her just before she went to meet MPs and minutes after she'd received some good news about her campaign.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful. The decision has been made by DEFRA and the government to advise the use of deflagration technique rather than the high explosives for disabling the munitions which lie on the seabeds around the North Sea and the Irish Sea. This is for the offshore wind farms which are being developed. And of course, if you're going to put the stem of a great windmill down, the seabed has to be cleared. At the moment, they've been using a lot of high explosive, which means that they blow everything, kingdom come, out of the water, including destroying the seabed and damaging sea life and so on, and appallingly deafening whales and dolphins, damaging their sonar. And suddenly the deflagration technique, which is 100 times less damaging, extremely quiet. You fire a little cone into the bomb and it burns it out from the inside. This has now finally been suggested as the best way to go ahead from the government, and we are thrilled to bits.
Yeah, the government's saying it is now their preferred option. It's not quite a complete ban. So will you continue your campaign?
I think we will, and maybe we shall just keep urging them to make it a complete ban. Very occasionally you'll have to use high explosives on some particular occasions, but mostly if they can say that this is, I mean, I suppose they have to say at the moment the preferred ban because they are cautious. They have to step forward very cautiously, but this is a huge step forward.
Joanna, how much do you think of this victory for you today comes down to you? I know you wrote to the Prime Minister and his wife about this issue earlier on this year. Did you get a response from them on it?
Mrs. Johnson, Carrie, wrote back to me a very charming letter. It had been sort of lost in the files for a bit, which is why it didn't come back for quite a long time. But I know that their hearts are with conservation. I think it's just a matter of application. I think sometimes things get nudged into the long grass. But in this case, we were leaning on an open door. Carrie is very much an environmentalist. And at this time, when the world is really looking forward to saving everything we can, not just human life, but everything that exists, you know, trees and plants and marine life, this was something that was so welcome. And you're very sweet to say it was anything to do with me. It was actually the campaign that did this, and the people who support the campaign, the MPs and the members of the House of Lords, and all the thousands and thousands of people who wrote in and signed the petition to ban these terrible systems of blowing up bombs when they could be burnt out, deflagrated.
There was lots of support for that. Joanna Lumley, thank you very much, and thank you for bringing us that update this lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Finally, this lunchtime, I'm a Celebrity is about to hit the screens again with a new lineup of big names set to take on this year's Bush Tucker trials. They're heading to Wales again as the pandemic has put paid to the show being filmed in Australia for a second year. Sally Biddulph on the famous faces taking on the Camp Challenge.
It's that time of year again, folks. I'm a Celebrity is back. Another 10 hopefuls vying to be the next king or queen of the castle, inheriting Giovanna Fletcher's crown. Once again, Gurich Castle in Wales provides the backdrop, and there's lots of nerves.
Spiders, bad. Rats, horrific. Why am I doing this show?
If I'm brutally honest, I don't want anything crawling on me, like stuff crawling on me. Like, do you know when you get like a little piece of hair on you and you like freak out? I'm that person.
Every single person on earth is scared about being buried alive.
I'm probably not very suited for the castle.
Their fears well founded, according to previous celebs.
Going into the camp, I wished I knew how actually cold it was going to be. I would have turned my heating off way before I got there and just prepared for that cold, because you say it's cold, but when you're actually in there and you haven't eaten a lot, you're not doing a lot of exercise and there's a lot of waiting around, the cold really gets into them toes. So wear 2 pairs of socks, definitely.
But the biggest challenge may be fellow contestants.
The only thing about this series which can irritate me sometimes is when people go in and immediately start moaning. Well, you feel like saying, well, then why did you go in? I'm going to have to sit on that really hard because my instinct is going to be to say, oh, for God's sake, shut up. So I'll say that in my head, but hopefully it won't come out of my mouth.
Good luck with that, Richard. And some ground rules too from the show's oldest ever contestant.
If anybody's planning on not cleaning up, if they don't, maybe the Dane bit will come out.
It all starts this Sunday. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Not long to wait now. That's all we've got time for this lunchtime. Mary's here with the evening news at 6:30 from me and everyone else on the Lunchtime team today. Bye-bye.